It can be a bit of a jarring passage to read during a wedding, but the real question is, what, if anything, does it have to do with marriage? Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Thursday, June 9th, 2022. All this week I've been looking at passages we commonly read at weddings, especially those that talk explicitly about love. The reason I'm looking at them is that almost none of them are specifically about love within the bond of marriage. Instead, they mostly have to do with the love of disciples for one another. In the three passages we've read so far, 2 from Paul and 1 from the writer of the letters of John, the immediate context is conflict and discord among church members. Not something we would immediately associate with romantic love, which is, after all, what we're often thinking about at weddings. But as I've observed in all of this week's devotionals so far, marriage isn't primarily about romantic love at all. That may be what gets couples together, but it is agape love, the love of disciples for one another, that provides a more solid foundation for marriage. And so I do believe these passages are absolutely appropriate to read at weddings. Today's reading, though, is a little bit different. Instead of coming from one of the letters, it comes from the Gospel of John and is a portion of Jesus' words to his disciples that he says during the Last Supper. It's a part of the single longest speech by Jesus, what is usually called the farewell discourse. It begins at the beginning of John chapter 13 and runs through chapter 16, 4 full chapters. Now, the portion we often read at weddings is just a brief portion of the discourse. We read it, of course, because it does have to do with Jesus' command to love one another. In this passage, Jesus says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another, as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name. I am giving you these commands so that you may love one another." Okay, so let's name the elephant in the room here and then move on. Laying down one's life for another is not what we really want to talk about at a wedding. In fact, it raises all sorts of ugly possibilities, such as spousal abuse. But if we can get past that and acknowledge that this is most certainly not what Jesus had in mind, we can make some sense of this passage. When Jesus mentions laying down one's life for one's friends, he's talking about laying down his own life, and in a literal sense. But he also seems to use this to indicate more generally what love is like. For most of us, it will not mean literally dying for someone, but rather being servants to one another. That is consistent with how he begins this entire discourse, namely by washing his disciples' feet. But once again, this can be a bit of a tricky thing in our day and age. Those who believe that wives, for example, should be subservient to husbands may read into this idea that the role of wives is to serve their husbands, not the other way around. But nothing here even remotely suggests this. Instead, it is a description of mutual service, which is a more robust understanding of the love of disciples for one another. No hierarchy, but radical equality, in which people love one another through acts of service. Which brings us back to love within the context of marriage. The model of the mutual love of Christian disciples for one another actually provides a wonderful model for those who choose to live within the covenant of marriage. No dominance of one partner over another is even remotely suggested here. Instead, a relationship of radical equality in which two people commit to a life of caring for one another freely and equally. Tomorrow, a reading from the Old Testament, and one that most closely speaks to romantic love. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.